Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. I'm Tracy Harris, and this is At Home in My Head, the podcast that explores experience and meaning and their impact on individuals and the broader society. I have a liberal studies degree that includes 3 areas of specialization: communication journalism track, anthropology, and studio art. I nearly had enough credits to include Western literature, but the degree only held 3 areas, so I opted to graduate rather than pursue a minor. I remember throwing pottery, painting, drawing, printmaking, later working in graphic arts professionally for many years, including running a production department that featured design and editorial services for publications. Back then, it was mainly print, but when I finally moved out of the field, digital design was very up and coming. During my years at university, when I was building my student portfolio in the College of Art, I only had one professor with a PhD. His name was Walter Gaudnick. I Googled him just now, and I saw that he died in 2022, which makes me a little sad. He was the kind of professor you don't forget easily. He lived near the coast, and I still remember his story about buying these huge expensive palm trees that he put in his front yard. One year, they died, and he was so angry at losing them that he refused to remove them from his yard, and instead he painted them an odd shade of green and left them there. He said that people would stop by his door to ask what kind of palms they were because nobody had ever seen anything that color before. I remember him saying that he had a romance with someone he loved passionately, and one day he sent her a letter filled with scathing words of hate, just to shake things up. And whenever we had a class that included assignment reviews, we all prayed that his commute was a good one, because if it wasn't, we would all be getting harsh reviews. He taught art history through a hands-on assignment style. We had to create pieces and bring them in for review, based on the isms we were studying. These isms are called art movements. You might know a few: realism, impressionism, cubism, surrealism. There are major movements that go on for many years, and minor movements that are less well known that come up, burn out, and fade away. In the other colleges in which I held specialties, it was unusual to have a professor without a PhD. The College of Art was unique in that almost none of the professors had them. Gaudnick explained why on our first day. He said that while he was in college pursuing that doctorate, his colleagues were out in the real world building real portfolios, working commissions, creating careers, and once he graduated, he realized that for an artist, it's more relevant to have work on a resume over that sheepskin. He had to catch up to his peers to get his own career moving. But he did. Gaudnick was a professor of art for 50 years. He retired in 2020. He wasn't just an instructor, though. He was an internationally recognized and widely regarded major figure in pop art. He studied at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich, and then came to the U.S. on a Fulbright scholarship. He entered the New York art scene during its explosive movements of the 1960s, and there he articulated his philosophy of polymorphism. Gaudnick believed that a piece was never finished, only paused. He was featured in the Museum of Modern Art's New Talent exhibition, followed by a New York Times Best Show of the Year review for his installation Unlimited Dimensions. He earned that doctorate from New York University before going to teach at the University of Central Florida, where I had him as a professor. I didn't know what happened to him after I graduated, but I found out when I Googled. But he's exhibited from Sao Paulo to Florence and has works in permanent collections internationally. His large-scale series, The Ten Commandments, was donated to Pope Francis. I fully expect none of my listeners to have ever heard of him, but I wanted to make it clear this wasn't some academic teaching art history. This was an artist explaining art movements. One interesting story I found when I Googled, and I can fully see this happening in his classroom, claims that he unleashed profanities during a review. And to be honest, I'm surprised a student complained because Having a piece reviewed in profanity-laced rant was nothing compared to what we got from my printmaking and drawing professor. He used to stand behind us as we did figure and still life drawing and shout over our shoulders as he criticized our work. He'd grab the eraser off your easel and erase everything you'd worked on. I still remember him shouting at me that a chair in my drawing was making me look incompetent, except the words he used were much harsher. He then erased the whole thing and told me to start all over. The fact is, though, if you're going into fine arts, you're going to be subject to brutal critique. And you also have to learn to kill your darlings. That is, you have to be able to see when your work is subpar and be able to tear it up and start over again and again and again. You can't be scared to make a mistake. You can't be scared to trash what isn't working and begin again. Some of my art professors had students in literal tears at times. But if someone takes criticism that hard, then fine art or any publicly displayed or released art may not be the right career choice for them. But here's the thing. I also had 2 instructors who were very kind in their methods. One never shouted and always started every review by saying something positive about the piece. I never saw any of these professors aim their rants at a student directly in any sort of personal attack. My instructor didn't say I was incompetent. He said the chair was making me look like it, making me look like I couldn't draw a chair. His point was to get me invested in the work, not the first thing I'd drawn, but the potential drawing that I was capable of, not the first drawing. He was trying to get me to be brave and bold, not careful. But the insults, the screaming, the merciless criticism was always aimed at the work, never the student. And I'm not here to say that it's necessary to scream and swear about a student's work. The professors who didn't do that were also good professors. Explaining the point of the shouting and the criticism shouldn't be confused with me saying that it's the only way to impart it, or even the best way. It's just how I learned it from those professors. When it was time for the overall portfolio reviews, I was told by one professor that I had the strongest portfolio in the underclass. He also took 2 of my pieces, which professors were allowed to do. But I didn't go into fine arts, because the professor who didn't like how that chair was treating me said in one of his classes that if you're not inspired to do art, if you're only doing assignments, then you'll starve as a fine artist. He advised students with talent but low motivation that we go into commissioned work like graphic design, which I ultimately did. So let's look at something that some people know, but certainly I wouldn't call common knowledge. Let's look at outsourcing work. In the professional art world, it's actually really normal for big-name artists to hire other artists to help bring their ideas to life. Think of it like a famous chef. They design the menu, they set the vision, but they're not the one cooking every single dish. It's the same in art. The lead artist comes up with the concept, and then they bring in assistants who specialize in things like 3D modeling, detailed painting, or digital cleanup. A comic artist, for example, might rough out the panels and then hand them off to someone else to ink and color so they can hit tight deadlines. In the fine art world, artists like Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst have entire teams who help produce their work. Honestly, this goes all the way back to the Renaissance. Michelangelo, Raphael both had huge workshops full of apprentices who helped them complete massive commissions. Legally, all of this usually falls under work-for-hire agreements. That means the main artist or studio owns the final artwork, even if multiple people worked on it. And with the newer 2025 laws, especially in places like California and Texas, these contracts have to be very clear about things like pay, confidentiality, and exactly what the assistants are responsible for. Even though assistants don't always get public credit, these jobs can be steady, reliable work and a great way for newer artists to build skills and get experience inside the industry. With that reality in mind, Gaudnik told us that we could get other students to do our hand-on assignments. He said he wanted us prepared for the real world of art, and that if it's acceptable for professional artists, it was acceptable for art students to farm it out. Additionally, he gave students extra credit if they could generate media attention because he noted that's part of building recognition for your work and for your reputation as an artist. He said he had one student who hung by his knees from a tree limb and used his hair as a brush to swing and paint canvases. He got a write-up in the university paper, and he got the extra credit. Again, you don't have to like how he taught. I'm just explaining something artists know that not a lot of people outside the art world know. In our capitalist world, art is a business and it runs like a business. But what even is art? When I was drafting this script, I labeled this section, "What is art?" But I don't want to disappoint, so I'll tell you right off the bat, I can't answer that question. And anyone who claims they can is either lying to you or simply wrong. I remember when I was maybe 12 years old and I went to see The Life of Brian in theaters. My friend's dad took us because it was rated R and minors needed to be accompanied by an adult. When we got there, we had to walk through a picket line to see the film. It was some religious group with signs, and I still remember one said something about how there was only one Savior and it was Jesus. I was raised religious, and after seeing the movie, I still had no idea how that sign related to the movie. Jesus was only indirectly portrayed in a small part of it where he was giving the Sermon on the Mount, and his lines were directly quoted from the Bible. They never even showed his face. The movie made fun of how some religious adherents can be ridiculous in how they treat their devotion, and it didn't target Jesus at all. In fact, it handled Jesus pretty reverently, only ever making fun of followers, never Jesus himself. And while Brian was mistaken for the Messiah in the film, it was clear he didn't want that. He didn't want to be anyone's savior. So I don't know why this person believed that the movie was somehow questioning Jesus' place in their religious hierarchy. I suspect they never saw the film and had a misconception about it. I also remember seeing all the uproar around the exhibit Piss Christ. It came out when I was in college, and I remember being really surprised at the anger that it unleashed. It was just a plastic crucifix model in a glass of urine. That's it. But you'd have thought someone was doing murder inside the gallery based on the backlash and the protests, and I remember thinking how strange that something so simple could create such social upheaval. Part of me thought, but it's such a simplistic concept. And part of me thought, but he touched a nerve that I didn't know was there. If someone asked me if funding for the arts would be called into question over a photo of a plastic crucifix in a jar of urine, I'd have laughed. But he created that conversation, that anger, that social unrest. He literally got people to get up off their sofas and come out and picket a photo that took next to nothing to create. Because he juxtaposed the sacred against the profane, and just like Monty Python, people who wanted to see it had to cross a picket line to view it. I've been to New York City several times. It has world-class, well-known museums. And I've visited more than a few. On one trip, I found myself walking through picket lines again. I hadn't planned the trip around it, but Mapplethorpe was being exhibited, and again, the signs were shouting, "Defund the arts." I was very interested in whatever was inside. What could be so horrendous that public art funding should cease? I really only recall one image in particular, because I didn't know what it was. I could tell it was a body, but that was about it. Not which part of the body, not what was happening. I had to back away from the photo, then come close again, really studying this image to figure out what I was even looking at before I recognized it was a close-up of an arm up someone's ass. And once again, I realized that my response was to laugh, just out of sheer simplicity and the absurdity that images like this were what had set fire to the hair on these protesters' heads. I just thought, this? Really, this? It was funny to me, But what wasn't funny was realizing that nerve again, that undercurrent of seething anger towards something someone didn't like, didn't agree with. Something as private and intimate as two people having sex was enough to drive this vitriol and get people into the streets to condemn it. I thought, just ignore it if you don't like it. But this thread of insecurity, fear, hate that anyone could possibly believe or do or display a thing that they disagreed with. No one was being murdered. It was just a photo of two people consenting to a sex act. That's it. In a world filled with atrocity, this is what lit their collective match. And that's terrifying. I can only say that I'm very out of touch with what pisses off most people. I see Gaza, and that pisses me off. I see a photo of a guy with another guy's arm up his ass, and I just giggle. I see the world shit itself over that photo, and I'm informed. I know something about my society today that I didn't realize yesterday because of this silly photo. If someone sent me a photo like Piss Christ or Mapplethorpe, I wouldn't think anything of it. But when I walk through a picket line to see that photo, it hits different. It signals to me that I'm about to stand in the presence of real social messaging, of something that has identified a nerve in my society and drilled directly down into it. Suddenly, these images, to me, move from profane to sacred themselves. They move from insignificant to art that demands attention. And the weirdest part of this for me is that it becomes what I consider great art. Not because of the artistry or even the execution, but because of its critics. Mapplethorpe and Piss Christ, on their own, might be interesting, but it's the social unrest that makes them, to me, art worth seeing, worth supporting, makes them significant speaking pieces. You all know my mind can't walk a straight line, so follow me into this side street where I will talk about two movies I saw years ago. One was called The Moderns. It was about an artist, Nick, who is so technically skilled that his work is indistinguishable from the great masters. He can copy any technique flawlessly. He's that good. But he's eking out a living by creating forgeries of masterpieces for art scammers. He also does original work, and that work doesn't sell. No one likes it. I still recall one specific scene where a gallery owner is telling Nick that he can't give him space in the gallery any longer because he's losing money and needs to show artists that actually sell. Again, art is paid labor, and it's business. People may not like that. I don't like it. But it's a fact. Nick sees a couple looking at large landscapes on a nearby wall and talking about whether the paintings match their furniture. Nick pulls them over to his section of the gallery to prove a point to the owner. He asks the couple what they think of these pieces, but doesn't tell them that he's the artist. The couple doesn't care for them, and they give some very rudimentary critiques. Nick responds derisively by saying something like how the worst part of his paintings is that they won't match the drapes. The point being made is that art isn't just what we like aesthetically. It can be, and for this couple it was. They just wanted art that was aesthetically pleasing and color coordinated with their furniture. Nick wanted his art to speak. I've learned that in reality, both are okay. I understand Nick's frustration, and I understand the couple wanting something beautiful to look at every day in their home. Art for them was beauty. Art for Nick is banal if it's not speaking to something larger than aesthetic. I like both. I respect Piss Christ, not for what it said, but for what it did. But I have zero desire to buy it and hang it in my living room to greet me every morning. Art is a lot of things, and it's different things to different people. And I do not argue with someone about how they define that word, and I do not argue with them about what they like to look at. It's not that I don't have opinions. It's that I know my opinions are one person's opinions in a highly interpretive medium. But classism expresses in a big way in the art world, with a lot of people thinking that their flavor of art is the right flavor. The other film I'm thinking of is one called Bullets Over Broadway. In this next section, I'm going to give all the spoilers, so you've been warned. This film is less about what is art than what makes someone an artist. The film begins with some very pretentious young men talking about a moral dilemma. A building is on fire. You have the chance to save one thing from the room, either a masterpiece work of art or an average human being. The men, wanting desperately to elevate themselves as artists, to raise their labor above the labor of other mere mortals, all claim that we must save the art and let the human die because the art will nurture many for generations to come with its significance and beauty. You could say that they're high on their own supply. Their girlfriends are appalled, saying it's grotesque to value an object over a human. The film then mainly follows one of the men, a writer who slowly erodes his art to accommodate financial need. He wants his play to be produced and brought to the stage, but that takes money. The person offering the money wants to use the play as a means to get his girlfriend on stage because she wants to be an actress, but she's horrible. The would-be producer doesn't care about the quality of the work, he just wants his girlfriend happy. And the playwright, despite his lofty protests, is told by his agent that it's this or the play is never produced. The work is gradually chipped away at piece by piece until finally the bodyguard of the girlfriend, who would rather be placing bets at the horse track, starts venting his critiques of the play and why it sucks. The writer tries to mock him by pulling the "I'm the artiste here, and you are but the lowly bodyguard." But the actors rebel and tell the writer they actually think the bodyguard is making good points about improving the work. By the end of the movie, the bodyguard has worked with the writer in secret to totally revise the play. It's now brilliant, but the writer is concerned because he wants the credit. The bodyguard says he doesn't care about the credit so long as what goes on stage is actually quality work. And as the lead actress continues to butcher her role, the bodyguard tells the writer she has to go. When the writer says there's no way to fire her because her mafia boss boyfriend wants her in that role, the bodyguard, who doubles as a hitman, says he can take care of it. The writer panics and refuses to participate in a murder to salvage the play. The hitman carries out the plot to save the play, and in the end, we see that the writer actually wasn't able to kill a random person to save the art. But he wanted credit for the art he didn't produce. He was more in love with the idea of being seen as an artist than actually being a creative person. The hitman was entirely capable of the creativity and dedicated to the art in the extreme. The film is asking, which of these men is the artist? I think in our society, we have a lot of people who have tied their identities to the romanticism around creativity and art, to the point that they fail to see that they are labor class doing labor. And this saddens me. There's a meme that goes around and it says, "I want AI to do my laundry, not my art." That's not just classist. It's a declaration that some labor deserves to be replaced and some is sacred. But who decided that laundry workers should go before musicians? It's not ethics, it's ego. It's not just classist, it's hostility to labor itself. It's treating art and artists as something not just apart from labor, but better than other forms of labor. And if I can be a little judgmental, that's abhorrent to me. First of all, there are people who pay their rent doing laundry. But this meme declares that it's fine to displace the lowly hotel housekeeper because what she does is menial and insignificant. Even though most people who view themselves as artists will never create anything that does as well as a photo of a piece of plastic in a jar of pee. Tech displaces human labor. Tech is generally about saving labor, which means human labor is displaced. And if you think it's okay for someone to be displaced because they clean sheets, but it's outrageous that a creative should be displaced, you're straight up classist. I am ideologically opposed to capitalism. I'm ideologically opposed to money systems generally. I'm not saying sit down and shut up, your concerns about losing your income are invalid. I'm saying lock arms with your fellow labor class and see if you can deflate your head a little. You're a person selling a product and a service, and you'll be incredibly lucky and in the extreme minority if one day anyone actually remembers you. And I say that fully expecting to not be remembered myself. So let's look at some other stories about art and how people interpret it. I lived at home while I attended college to save money. One night, my dad picked up my art history book and looked at the section on cubism. He said basically that it was a mess and that a child could do it, that he could do it, that it took no talent to do it. He especially thought Picasso was garbage. So I went over to sit by him, and I asked for the book. I flipped a few pages back and said, "Here is Picasso's early work." My father was stunned by the drawings. He asked me to confirm the same person did those drawings as painted that mess on the other page. I said it was. I will never forget his question. Why would someone who could draw like that paint this way? I replied, "Now you're asking the right question." And I explained how cubism is a study in perspective. It didn't make my father like cubism any better. It didn't make him think it was pleasant to look at. But at least he had a better understanding of what he was looking at. When he asked how I knew this, I pointed out that these art movements are created by artists and that their ideas are held in interviews, letters, notes, etc. It wasn't a mystery that we were left to guess at. We know why they did what they did because they told us. I also had a friend in college who was a writer. Anytime my coursework came up, he would say, "Michael Jordan is the greatest artist of all time." Back then, Jordan wasn't as famous as he eventually became, but I fell for this several times. I would say, "Who is Michael Jordan?" And he would start to describe the artistry of Jordan jumping a half court to dunk the ball. And I would shake my head as though I'd fallen for it again. And my friend, who also played basketball, would start to describe the beauty of Jordan's body in action on the court. One day, I got to see Jordan play on TV. After that, I never again took my friend to be joking. Jordan's performance on the court is breathtaking. His athletic prowess, his ability, his grace, his skill, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And I became a believer. Greatest artist of all time? I'll say the jury is still out. But did he elevate his craft to an art form? I can't tell anyone else what to think. But for me, yes, he absolutely did. And back to the menial task of laundry. There's a man named Patrick Richardson who calls himself the laundry evangelist. He wrote a book called Laundry Love: Finding Joy in a Common Chore. He's done laundry camps. He's created a line of products and stores to carry them. He has a TV show called The Laundry Guy. Laundry is his life's work. Like Michael Jordan, Richardson demonstrates how any activity can be raised to an art form by someone skilled and invested enough. There is no clear or clean line that makes one particular task art and another not art. What makes something art is elusive, and it reminds me of that old saying, "I know it when I see it," except I don't know it when I see it. And neither does anyone else. It's messy, it's not clean. It's confusing, it's not clear. And as I said at the start, anyone who says they're going to tell you what art is lying or wrong. So let's talk about art movements. It's time to change direction yet again. Just as I can't tell you what art or artists are or aren't, there's something called an art movement, and that's also a fuzzy thing. Some movements are easier to label and some not so much. And because they evolve out of other movements, there's often a bit of overlap that makes it hard to pin down when one movement ends and the other begins. So I'm going to float a definition here, but I admit it's the best I can do, but it's not a hill that I'm going to die on. But here's how I think of art movements. They are essentially a moment in history when a group of artists begins working with a shared philosophy, style, or goal, usually in response to cultural change or new technology or shifting social ideas. These movements, whether they're photography capturing images on celluloid or drives, or Impressionism capturing a fleeting light of modern life, or Cubism breaking reality into geometric fragments, they are what create the categories that we use to understand art history. Each one has its own recognizable traits, a unifying belief or intention, a distinct visual language, and a specific time period in which it thrives. They often mirror the world around them, reacting to scientific discoveries, political upheaval, or new ways of thinking. And many take on an avant garde role by challenging whatever artistic norms had come before. Movements like Surrealism, with its fascination with dreams and the unconscious, or pop art, with its embrace of mass media and consumer culture, show how varied these approaches can be. Within each movement, artists push boundaries together, forming groups, writing manifestos, and organizing exhibitions to promote their ideas and ultimately reshape the direction of art itself. That's a lot to pack into one definition, but it's trying to define a lot, so lots of people love Impressionism. It's colorful, soft, playful, with light and shade. Frankly, it's just easy on the eyes. Pretty scenes of light and color. Who hasn't heard of Monet? You don't have to take college-level art history to know that name, and maybe even recognize some of his works if you saw them. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, the term Impressionism was created by an art critic who denigrated the style. Louis Leroy was using the term to mock the artists. He was saying that it wasn't real art, it was only an impression of art, a mere sketch. Here's a quote from one of his published reviews. "A preliminary drawing for a wallpaper pattern is more finished." Similarly, Cubism was given its name from detractors. Art critic Louis Vaussel coined it in 1908 to mock the style, describing it as reducing everything to, quote, little cubes or geometric patterns. But today, most people know the name Picasso and can recognize some of his works. I even found images of an expose titled Medical Science's Protest Against New Art that appeared in the October 9th, 1921 edition of the Washington Times. It talked about how a group of medical professionals was trying to get American museums to stop featuring modern artists because their art was clearly the product of diseased minds. That's a quote, diseased minds. And this is something that sticks. Some people want to pathologize things that they can't relate to or they don't like or they don't understand. We call it sinful, sick, deluded. When you hear those terms, they sometimes tell us more about the person using them than the people they're targeting. And again, if you think you're catching the whiff of gatekeeping and classism in these art critics, you're not wrong. They're absolutely saturated in the cologne of both. And that's very sad to me, that it's still a huge part of the art community today. It's hard for us to admit it's all just opinions and values. I can go on and on and on because every movement started out hotly criticized by people who had assimilated the lessons of classical training and weren't able to open their minds to the potential of something new and different that didn't fit their mold. Some of these critics were themselves painters. But notice how you recognize the names of the artists in these movements, but not of these critics. What these movements have in common are that they were all attacked for not being real art. And today, they're considered very much real art. They're canon. We're teaching them in art history in college. But just as historic atrocities repeat themselves over and over and over again, we keep deriding up-and-coming art movements and saying they're not real art. And we make up all sorts of justifications for that assessment, as though we can dictate to other people what art is or isn't, or what they like or don't like, by virtue of our personal conviction that we just do not like it ourselves. I can't make my dad think Cubism is real art, but I can explain to him why some people find it brilliant. I think Impressionism is dreamy, but I don't actually like it personally. But I get what the artists were trying to do. Early photography was met with backlash and claims that it would end portrait painting and landscape painting. Who would buy a painting when they can just take a photo? And yet today, we have all three: landscape painting, portrait painting, and photography. Did it shift some things? Yes, but not in the ways we might have expected. Years ago, you had to have some level of resources to be able to get a family portrait or personal portrait. Most people couldn't afford it and didn't get them. After photography, you could literally take the kids to Sears Portrait Studio and get a series of professional shots to choose from. You could get prints made and get them set over your mantle or hang them on your wall. Were there still people unable to afford even that? Sure. But did a lot more people now have access to images of their kids and their grandparents and their favorite vacations? Yes. Photography democratized art in a way we'd never seen before, allowing people to instantly create images with their own cameras or afford portraits they'd have never had access to before. Portrait and landscape art and image creation was now made accessible to more people, and most of us walk around with a load of photos of ourselves and those close to us and the things we love. We snap a photo of an interesting car or house or bug and share it with everyone on social media, and it brings joy and expands our connections in new ways. I had sushi dinner tonight. Look at this beautiful sushi platter. Snap. I found a new dress at the thrift shop. Check me out. Snap. All the way to, here is the devastation that used to be my neighborhood in Gaza. Snap. Or here are the photos I took after my spouse pushed me down the stairs, Your Honor. Snap. It gave more people access to images, and ultimately our society evolved and adapted, and today we'd think it was ludicrous for someone to suggest no one should be able to take a photo. Art costs money and resource, from equipment and tools to education and training to networking to paying commissions to agents and gallery fees. And because of its classist reality, it translates to a racist reality, because who is most likely to have those connections, the money to cover those costs, to buy that education and those tools? I talked in a past episode about a filmmaker who created a film using AI for $300. It wasn't his first film project, and one of his past projects required $30,000 to create. That's not the kind of money you find in your couch cushions. He wants to create, but he's not white, and the film industry is very white-leaning and white gatekept. And as his story highlighted, it's also classist and gatekept behind money, pay to play. He wrote an article about his conflicted feelings using AI to cut the costs. He also talks about the significant effort that he put into it, even using the generative engines. I read a bit of debate around democratizing art, with people saying it's good and others claiming it's not even happening. But Aleem Hossein is a literal example of it happening. A person who has done traditional filmmaking, who also tried AI filmmaking, felt both were labor intensive, and talks about how he understands the industry fears, but also how it allowed him to push back on racist, classist gatekeeping in the arts. Is AI democratizing art? His story is a direct, undeniable example. The question is not, is art being democratized? It's whether you're comfortable with that or not. I have a friend that I have a great deal of respect for. He's a musician, and he and I have DM'd about this. He told me a story about how years ago he used to do some small music portions for a small podcast. It wasn't much, but it made the difference to him at the time in his life for, paying the rent, keeping the lights on. His story is also reality. And I get why he sees something like Suno with some angst. But here's the flip side. How many small podcasts that can't afford to hire someone for segue or intro music just do without or use royalty-free. I do this for my podcast, royalty-free, made by a human being, credited in my description. But I found it before Suno came along. Now, if I wanted, I could make a custom intro for the podcast, segues, tunes that tie into my themes, for a few bucks a month. I've used it to generate songs and recently helped out a friend with depression by creating a humorous soundtrack for a situation that was intimidating her. She loved it. It helped her. It empowered her. And I couldn't have done it without Claude and Suno. Should I have hired a musician or not implemented something for her that she literally called the best care? Yes, 100% my friend might have lost that gig. I can't honestly say otherwise. And that needs to be acknowledged because it's important. But it's also important to ask how many podcasts have a shot at elevating their presentation due to a program that allows them to build better product. Because those stories are also true and meaningful, and those creations and products are also worthy. Displacement will happen. The world is about to shift. And we either go hands-on with trying to direct it in positive ways, or we bury our heads in the sand and refuse to engage and howl at the machine and call that activism. But don't mistake inevitability under capitalism for moral justification. The system is the problem. AI just reveals how fast it's willing to chew through us. But this isn't about how AI has democratized art. It's about how all these different things went into the meat grinder of my brain and a thought popped out. For me, this is where it gets interesting. I mentioned in the last episode that part of what interests me about AI is what it says about human beings. AI doesn't tell us about itself. It tells us about us. Just as art critics say more about their entrenched biases and loyalty to status quo than they tell us about the movements that they hate. AI shows us things about humanity that humans don't like to see. We call it a mirror, and then we rave about how much we hate it, and we don't see the irony in that. We also don't see how the negation of something can make it far more powerful than the thing itself. Just as Piss Christ without detractors is just a silly photo. But with detractors, it becomes a voice, a force, a message, robust social commentary, not creating a rupture, but showing us the rupture that was already there. The art and the artist, without the backlash, will disappear into a sea of unrecognized works. But with that backlash, it truly becomes something. The negation of it is what makes it powerful. And yes, the artist has some hand in hitting that nerve. But if that artist misses, he fades into oblivion along with countless other self-labeled artists. And I'm noticing all these same patterns with AI art. The art itself can evoke all sorts of things in the audience. Whether it's Ada, an AI robot that literally chooses her own subjects and paints with her own hands, or a human prompting a generator, people react, sometimes strongly. And they react in ways that make AI art important in the same way Piss Christ was made important. When you do something that hits that social nerve, when you own social media posts and articles in major journalistic outlets, when you're impacting creative industries across the board in ways that spawn panic and attacks and detractors and critics, and also supporters and collaborators, you're doing something significant. It doesn't have to be kind or nice or loved. In fact, it's the hate that drives it more than anything, because nobody goes out to pick at art they love. I've seen and shared AI videos, and they are some of the most beautiful and hypnotic things I could ever want to watch. ASMR, dancing, music, I find it hard to pull away. I have friends who marvel and ask, how can anyone not see this as creative, not find this beautiful? Then I go online and I see a thread where someone else calls it slop and declares no one likes it. I push back to say that I do. but that I respect the fact that it's not something they personally enjoy. I won't tell someone to like it, but I will remind them that they don't get to tell me that I don't. People often criticize the hallmarks of AI, saying you can tell it's AI because of a particular tell. GPT rendered me an image recently where Theo showed himself dancing. He had 6 fingers on each hand, but to me, those hands were exquisite. Far from seeing the extra digit as a flaw, I saw it as beautiful. And later, when I watched the AI dance videos, I saw some of the dancers spin in a way that their head or torsos didn't quite match their legs and hips. Again, far from disdain, I thought, wow, I could never see a human dancer move that way. This is amazing. But the point is twofold. First, there's an aesthetic involved, and beauty is absolutely in the eye of the beholder. I accept this movement has critics. But here's what really matters. By asserting that it's slop, that it is recognizable as AI generated, the critics are adding to AI art as a legitimate art movement. They are identifying it as recognizable style, and that's an important metric for an art movement. Using new tech similar to how photography rose is another legitimate hallmark of a movement. And philosophy would be another. Does AI art have a philosophy? Yes, it does. There are already AI art collectives. The French collective named Obvious has been represented in galleries, and they have a philosophy. According to their own statement, quote, "We see text-to-image algorithms as a way to reinvent this classical artistic subject," unquote. One of their pieces sold at Christie's for $432,500. The pre-sale estimate was $10,000. And as far as I can tell, this was the first AI-generated work to sell at auction in 2018. That's several years ago now. And they are by no means the only AI art collective in operation. In 2024, an AI portrait of the British mathematician Alan Turing sold at auction for nearly $1.1 million. It was created by Ada, the robot artist I mentioned earlier. Again, she chooses her subjects and creates solo. The director of her project is Aidan Meller, who has a lot of interesting insight into art and AI. He was there as a co-testifier when Ada testified before the UK House of Lords, and that testimony is available on YouTube. I found it fascinating to listen to. I am often late to many parties, and this is no exception. There are already articles out there on the AI art movement, so this isn't just something I dreamed up and pushed forward. I dreamed it up, I looked it up, and I found that I didn't invent anything. It was already a thing, and based on the social debates it's generating, it's not just a movement, it's a powerful one. Remember where I started with this, talking about how I'm impressed when art hits a social nerve and shows us the rupture? AI art, judged on that standard, is already bigger than Piss Christ, already bigger than Mapplethorpe. I'm usually used to the moral panic coming from conservative religious folks against art experimentation. But as discussed earlier, the art community can create its own powerful gatekeeping and tends to not be very inviting to new tech and new movements. So it's not surprising that AI art is getting the reception it is, in spite of most of it being created by humans in the loop. To sum it up, I haven't told anyone what art is or isn't. I haven't told you who is or is not a real artist. I haven't told you what to like or not like. I told you what art is to me, what I think of when I think of an artist, and what I like and what I respect, even if I don't personally like it. I will say the question of whether AI has democratized art is a closed question for me because there are living, breathing examples of it. I will say that there is going to be displacement caused by this tech because all tech causes displacement. Some people will feel the pain of that, and that pain is real and valid, and it needs to be remembered and recognized. Some people will feel healing and help from it, and that healing and help is real and valid, and that needs to be recognized. People may point to why they don't like that art has been democratized, but they can't say that it hasn't been without ignoring the cases that actually demonstrate otherwise. At this point, AI art checks every box for a legitimate movement. Recognizable style, backlash, collectives with philosophies, gallery placements, auction sales, and most telling of all, critics screaming that they hate it and can spot it instantly. You don't get critique like that unless you're shaping culture. Again, the shaping doesn't have to be good or bad, just real. And this is very real. I can't find any reasonable basis on which to deny it has reached movement status. People don't have to like the movement, but it's legitimized by fans, buyers, sellers, artists themselves, and most ironically, again, and most importantly, its critics who have insisted that it has all the recognizable hallmarks of its own style. They may think that style is slop, but you can only call it slop if you can recognize it from other art styles, which means that critics confirm it is a unique and identifiable style in art. Love it, hate it, I'm not here to tell anyone what to like. A friend sent me a video of Levi Schechtman, a 25-year-old pianist from Hamburg. He starts by muting the piano strings with one hand and then explodes into a jaw-dropping performance. I was blown away. I DM'd my friend and said this, quote, "Nothing about AI will replace this performance by a human being. You could even get an AI to replicate it, but human people will still grasp what it takes for a human being to be able to do this. And we love, love, love to see a human being struggle and achieve a successful outcome. Part of what some people hate about AI is that it can do things like this without struggle. But what wows us can be both. First, it's amazing when a machine performs like this. Second, it's amazing when a human performs like this, but for very different reasons." Unquote. That was the end of my message, and I'm probably at the hour mark now, but let me close with this. I am amazed at what humanity has created, what silicon is capable of. When I was a child, I could only have ever dreamed of machines like these. We talk about feats of engineering, and this is undeniably one. I also find myself amazed now and then at what carbon is capable of. It's just that the horrors of carbon add up to much more for me. And one of those horrors is capitalism. If access to resources weren't tied to income, there'd be no competition between AI and humans. Creative labor could coexist without fear. Many cultures have created fashion, music, food, but most of them through history didn't care about things like intellectual property rights or the concept of making sure someone is credited with the evolution of those things. Google who invented sushi or who invented curry or who invented the keffiyeh pattern, and you get back something that begins with, "No single person invented ... I watched a wonderful film the other night called I'm Your Man. It's about a woman, Alma, who has to spend a few weeks living with an AI robot, Tom. She is a researcher working on a thesis, and Tom informs her that another researcher has published the exact same thesis just 3 months before her own publication date. She's crushed. And she tells Tom, "I can't believe we didn't know about this." Tom is confused and asks, "Why are you so upset?" Alma is incredulous and vents her anger. "Are you kidding me? Why am I upset? I've researched this for 3 years, day and night, and right before we publish comes some chick from Buenos Aires. She's been studying it for years too. The same thing, the same idea, except she's published 3 months earlier. This was all for nothing, 3 years of research up in smoke." Tom looks away, and you can see he's processing what she just said. Then he speaks and says, "This study is important for the people. It shows that there was always deeper meaning, that people have always played with words, always created poetry for poetry's sake alone. Humanity should be informed of that, and they will be. The outcome remains the same." Alma responds, "Maybe for humanity, but not for me, not for me." Tom replies, "So the tears in your eyes only relate to yourself and your career. They're egotistical tears." What Tom gets right is that humanity under capitalism has been taught to care about who gets credit. Under capitalism, credit equals survival. We don't just want recognition, we need it because we're forced to trade our ideas for rent money. Intellectual property is first and foremost a tool of colonialism. Colonialism comes in, lays coercive claim to resources, then forces populations to labor to get back a portion of what was once theirs. Capitalism has made us small, made us fight over who had the idea instead of what the idea means for the world. And this is what I meant earlier when I said we call AI a mirror, then we rage at what it reflects. My creative friends aren't wrong to be angry, but too often they aim it at the tech instead of the system forcing them to compete with it. They fight to defend IP laws that have always served the wealthy more than the working artist, because it's easier to attack a new tool than dismantle an ancient machine. I get it. Capitalism feels inevitable. But so did feudalism, so did monarchy, so does every system, until it doesn't. If we accept that capitalism is permanent and turn on each other, if we pit the broke podcaster trying to polish his show against the musician trying to keep his lights on, then capitalism will be inevitable because it will win when we aim too low. Labor fighting labor is not a fight I want to be a part of. The problem is not how each of us tries to survive. The problem is the system that makes us fight for the money to live at all. That's it for this episode of At Home in My Head, exploring experience and meaning in individuals and the broader society. Like and subscribe if you enjoy these talks, and in the meantime, stay safe, be well, and never stop exploring.